Herzlichen Dank für das. Thank you so very much. What an amazing conference it's been so far today. Thank you to all of our speakers. You've been so amazing. I don't know about all of you, but I am so ready for that beer after this. Maybe a little shot of something else too. Before we get started, I do want to go over a few things. If you hear me refer to STEM, that's an American acronym that we use for science, technology, engineering, and math. So I just want to make sure that it's clear what it stands for if I say the word STEM. And despite the title, the talk I'm about to give may sound like I only think we should focus on liberal arts, but I'm not saying that. I love these subjects, but I will be advocating for the humanities today, because that's what software engineering is about the people. So I'm a product quality architect at Blackboard, which means that I help drive testing and automation strategy for one of the leading providers of education technology. And education excites me. I'm not meant to be a teacher. Let's just face it, I don't have the patience for children other than maybe my own some days on a good day. And I think my brother and sister, who are also both teachers, are absolute saints. But I do love that I get to help make a difference and an impact in others' journey in learning, whether students or teachers or parents. And I have two very young girls of my own that are getting started in their learning journey. So as I was thinking about topics for today, I knew quickly I wanted to talk about education and discussions that have really been alarming me lately. I want to consider the past, present, and future of the liberal arts, my experiences there, and the impacts of what we learn in our past on testing and technology today and in the future. Weaving this together has led me to this talk. It's very personal. I care very deeply about it, so I hope you find some value in it today. As far as my own past, I was raised just outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. In high school, 20 years ago this year, in fact, I was an exchange student to Germany and attended a gymnasium, or high school, for a couple of months in the town of Hof in Bavaria. My family also hosted several students throughout the years from Bad Oldesloe near Hamburg and Trondheim, Norway over the years. In reflecting about what I learned from these experiences, living abroad, I really learned how to step out of my comfort zone. I couldn't remember ever being on an airplane before I went, but there I was, leaving my friends and family behind, flying across an ocean for the first time. I had studied German in school. After 4 years, I thought, okay, I think I'm ready to go. And then I landed in Bavaria. They did not teach us Bayerisch. Might as well be its own language. But all was well. My host family helped guide me through the language and culture, which transcends just learning the words. My Norwegian sister taught me to keep an open mind about many things, but especially religion. She had traveled the world herself and talked about her experiences living in the Middle East, South America, and beyond, and so I learned so much from her. I can also still hear Martha say, "There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing." I disagree with that point. And looking back, these are hands down some of the best experiences in my life that have shaped who I am today. It's one thing to learn a language, but another to go live and experience another culture abroad. It's been crucial for me in working with global teams. I come now with this perspective knowing that we don't all think the same way, and that's what makes us better. After high school, I went on to Mary Baldwin University, a very small liberal arts, all-women's school in Virginia. I took a ton of art, humanities, language, writing, and sociology courses. But about 2 years in, I found I also had an interest in technology. It was, after all, the age of Napster and AOL Instant Messenger. May it rest in peace. So I took some programming courses, operating systems, and project management classes, along with my humanities courses that I loved, and I ended up with a Bachelor of Arts in Information Systems. I like to think of that as the intersection of people, technology, and organizations, and how we consume and interpret information to focus on designing, developing, and implementing solutions to achieve strategic goals. And if you went to university, what is the class that you remember most? I'm not going to lie. The one that comes to mind for me first is the history of rock and roll. Never told my parents I took that course and spent their money that semester. It started my love of folk music, though, using poetry and lyric to comment on current events. I expanded from the pop music I'm embarrassed to admit I listened to. Sorry. But I started listening to Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, and the Beatles. I like to call this the point where my parents and I finally started listening to the same music. And I'll never forget our final project was to perform an air band concert or lip sync in front of the entire school. Surprisingly, this actually taught me a few things. We learned how to produce a show and make an absolute fool of ourselves in front of an audience. Maybe today. It was madness, but honestly, it was one of my favorite memories. And the point is, it wasn't my computer science courses that stand out to me today. I find myself pulling so many years later from skills I learned as part of my liberal arts background. But enough about my personal background. To understand the current state of things, we need to go back in time a bit. Around the 5th century BC, some Greek city-states began to experiment with a new form of government called democracy. Fareed Zakaria wrote in Defense of Liberal Education that this innovation in government required a simultaneous innovation in education. Basic skills for sustenance were no longer sufficient. Citizens also had to be properly trained to run their own society. Education was considered essential for a free person to become a functioning member of that society and take part in civic life. They saw that humanistic subjects enabled citizens to contribute to society and also believed that science was a path to abstract knowledge. So the Greeks created an approach to education called the liberal arts. At their foundation, before anything else was taught, the Greeks focused on grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar, the art of inventing symbols and combining them to express thought. It's not just the technical, but also learning words and how they fit in context. So much I want to say here. That's another talk. But seriously, how many of you have ever done proofreading for your teammates or somebody else you know? Verb conjugation, it is a thing. Practice it. And they also taught logic, or called dialectic, which is the art of thinking. To see both sides of an argument is to understand it. I feel so much today that we are lacking in this area, myself included. Many people pick a side and don't listen to the other. But how can we truly form an opinion if we don't look at each argument, for or against, and know where we stand? I know I personally still have to work very hard to do this. And I'll also never forget in my German classes many years ago, we used to have to debate in German a particular topic, but our teacher would not let us pick the topic that we agreed with. We had to pick the topic we were against. And then, using grammar and logic, you could focus on rhetoric, the art of persuasion, speaking and writing to persuade others. As a lead or architect for automation projects, I find I have had to use this often, where it is to convince my boss of a direction I felt like we should take, or to guide a department to a process I think that we need to use. It's important, though, to have sound logic in our rhetoric. We need several people on our teams that can check the thinking behind the rhetoric, because she with the best rhetoric wins, whether correct or not. But you must be able to check that thinking. So fast forward in time, about 2,500 years now, and we have our modern liberal arts programs. You know them more as the humanities that branch from these teachings, like philosophy, psychology, history, education, political science. The list is pretty much endless. And you may know this in Germany as Die Geisteswissenschaften, literally translated sciences of the spirit. And I love German words because they do have a word for everything. And there's still a lot here that I believe you can learn in STEM, such as logical thinking and deconstruction. But what the humanities offers us is a way to deal with more emergent behaviors, socially emergent behaviors that science doesn't teach us necessarily. Managing a company or a team is more about dealing with that emergent system than the actual technology. There's no science book that says pull here, push here to get management to work. But there's a lot of alarming discussions going on around the world, in particular regarding the liberal arts and humanities. And I want to address them because they could impact us all in testing, automation, and technology. Today, we are finding that a liberal education is out of favor. In an age defined by technology and globalization, everyone is talking about skills-based learning. Politicians, business people, even many educators see it as the only way for their nations to stay competitive. They want learners to think practically about the skills that they will need in the workplace. To be sure, this is not a bad thing, but it's not the only thing that matters. In the US, the cost of a college education is astronomical, even in public education. I've seen it increase at an alarming rate, and it shows no trend of slowing down. In fact, a public in-state university is projected to rise 200%. I almost had a heart attack when our financial advisor told me for my children to go to school, it'd be $200,000 a person to achieve a 4-year degree. That's a problem. So to subsidize this a bit, our public institutions receive funding from the state and federal governments. And they are starting to ask if they should be doing that for certain liberal arts programs. Legislators have been very vocal about funding them with the belief they should not be paying for more there when they need more scientists or engineers. All over the news, we read that proposals to reduce or eliminate this funding are present. In my home state of North Carolina, our governor was asked in a radio show, how many PhDs in philosophy do I need to subsidize? He agreed and went on to state that funding should only be based if you can get a job. Florida's governor is also on a mission to defund liberal arts programs, asking if it's vital to have more anthropologists. And the state of Wisconsin is planning to cut money from subjects that don't train students for a specific job right out of school. Even at the elementary level, almost every year, I worry that my daughter's art programs will be cut. I think we can agree they should not do this. But this is hands down my favorite drawing for my daughter, but if clowns didn't terrify you before, they should now. But fun note, this started as a baby. Then she decided the eyes were a little too scary for her, so she added the hair and the nose, made a clown, and then that terrified her. So she added strings on the hands and the feet to make it a parade balloon, like in Thanksgiving Day parade. I love the mind of her. Anyway, it's not just the United States. The same conversations are happening around the world. In 2015, Shinzo Abe of Japan asked schools to eliminate or convert liberal arts programs completely, urging their institutions to offer a more practical vocational education. 26 out of 60 schools that offered these programs complied with this, and more have provided their plans to transition to this model. I'm really curious to see the data coming out in 5 to 10 years from now as these students graduate and what happens over time. But the government, fortunately, has started to soften their stance on total elimination, but have stated that they will do funding over the next 5 years to be allocated based on how universities propose to put into practice the government's vision. And beyond our governments, the media is not helping. You may have heard of a little data breach that happened in the United States. Some outlets are trying to state that a chief security officer is unqualified because she was a music composition major. I'm not saying she didn't mess up, but what are we telling people? It was not her music degree that did this. So I'm calling bullshit. Using logic, remember both sides of an argument, to try and understand their side of the story, I want to get it. With the cost of education and the debt students take on, at least in the United States, there is a concern people are taking on debt they cannot pay back. I still know people my age paying off their college education. But I believe this is a bit misguided. I personally believe these discussions are based on a few inaccurate beliefs or stereotypes based on the dialogue I am hearing or reading, in which those advocating to defund liberal arts are basing their narrative. And Linda Rising, I don't know if any of you have ever met her, she's given some fantastic keynotes, but she states that the danger in setting stereotypes is that they tend to become our reality. So the more that we repeat these and the more people believe them, what are we starting to think as a society? And so those beliefs are that, based on this, to me, illogical thinking, that everyone goes into the field that they studied, that liberal arts degrees will not earn money, and the skills they learn are not applied in a field outside of what they studied. So knowing that I come from a liberal arts background, I couldn't imagine everybody I work with were solely the product of a CS degree. So to look into this a little deeper, I started talking to some friends in the tech field. So I did a little survey, and it's about 150 people, but a pretty good sampling of the size teams that I work with sometimes. So let's take a look at the thought that if you studied a particular subject, you get a job in that area. Survey says 73% of the respondents had a liberal arts degree. Not only that, the fields that they had studied were incredibly varied. They had responses from philosophy, English, animal science, education, European Renaissance and Reformation history, sequential arts. So no, I don't think this poll is necessarily indicative of the entire field, but I do think it does tell us that we are not beholden to stay in the field that we studied. If you have an interest in tech, there is a place for you. And I love this sketch note from Jerry Kemble that she posted on Twitter. And in The Fuzzy and the Techie, Scott Hartley discusses that there's several tech pioneers, all with liberal arts majors. Just to name a few, Stuart Butterfield of Slack studied philosophy. Katrina Lake of Stitch Fix studied economics. Susan Wojcicki at YouTube studied history and literature. Hartley notes that these giants in tech are grounded in learning that taught methods of interrogation and rigorous thought, with many companies formed on the philosophies learned through liberal arts education. And remember I mentioned the media's response to the CSO with a background in music composition? This is what Twitter had to say in Unqualified for Tech. I recommend you find that hashtag. So many responses. I happen to call out two people that I admire very much. But so many were liberal arts degrees. There seem to be a lot of site reliability engineers, by the way, with liberal arts degrees. So what about the idea that you won't make money if you have a liberal arts degree? Okay, no, you're probably not going to make a ton of money if you do land a job in that field of study. But since we just saw that people can indeed work in a different field, those that responded to my survey in the tech field showed we aren't doing too bad for ourselves. In that survey that I conducted for the people with a liberal arts degree, we earned on average a bit over $111,000 over time. Breaking it down further, the people that responded and were within 5 years of entering the field earned on average $76,000 a year, compared to $65,000 with a CS degree. But what I love to see is that growth over time and the earning potential. Now, my survey shows a difference in the national associations of colleges and employment, where overall, liberal arts majors are somewhere between 35 and 40 right out of school. But to me, it looks like we have a place, and we're going to be okay. We're not off to a bad start. So let's look at the thought that skills from a liberal arts degree are not applicable to other fields. It's probably my biggest pet peeve that I hear. So can you guess what the most important skill needed in tech was, based on not only my survey responses, but many other surveys that I've reviewed? Yeah. The most common theme that I've found on all submissions was communication. People responded with writing, communicating technical concepts in easy to understand ways, persuading others to a point of view. There's the rhetoric. And my favorite, providing feedback with kindness. But what about me personally and the roles I have encountered in my field? I've been a tester that's seen a team evolve from purely manual testing to automation. an architect that's helped teams strategize testing approaches, and a product owner for automation teams. I have to say that I rely so much more on the skills I learned in courses deemed more as liberal arts than I did from computer science courses I took. But that's not to say they weren't important. So just brainstorming on skills that I use, I pull on all of these to challenge if we are building the right things, the impact we may have. And once we think we are building the right thing, helping to define acceptance criteria, model my testing, build requirements around automation frameworks, and communicating with teams. So as a test engineer, I found adaptability to be one of my key skills, and it served me well. Learning about resiliency and change has been crucial to me. As a non-coder, but not non-technical person in the age of automation, I thought my career was over. But I've adapted from tester to lead, to strategist, to technical PO, to herder of cats. I've seen our automation teams adapt to the changing ecosystems that we build. Sometimes it means throwing away things that we worked years on and starting from scratch, but we adapt and we move forward. As a lead, I really learned to work on the big picture view and the ability to focus on the details simultaneously. This has been critical in adapting test strategies for a particular feature that may have tentacles everywhere. So viewing the needs of the feature, but understanding its place in the holistic system, as well as stepping back and thinking about the business and users from that 10,000-foot view. I think it was my history courses that taught me this, looking at an event in time, but the effect that it might have on the world. And one of the most unexpected was peer mediation and active listening, skills I picked up in my sociology courses. Have you ever found yourself in a meeting where no one was agreeing on anything, but key decisions still had to be made? I think we can all relate there. Yeah, several of you are raising your hands. I learned to leave judgment at the door, listening as if I were in the other person's place, restating most important thoughts and features and feelings to make them feel heard. Do not interrupt or offer advice or give suggestions. Recognizing anxiety, especially pursed lips, sighs, squirming. Active listening has really helped me get to the root of issues with our teams and beginning to design and model ways to improve those circumstances. So it helps us work with different points of views. And I highly recommend reading anything you can on this. And as a woman in tech, my courses in gender studies have, if nothing else, made me more aware of the teams I build, how to work with others. And while I don't necessarily love the idea of gender stereotypes, I am fascinated with personality types and how to be effective considering we are all different. Now, I mentioned I went to an all-women's school, as did one Hillary Clinton. And she wrote in her book, in What Happened, that going to an all-women's school offered her the freedom to take risks, make mistakes, and fail without questioning her worth. I feel the same way, and that's what my all-women's education gave to me. I had a safe environment to fail in and learn from, and I like to provide that for my teams now. And I know I'm not alone in drawing on my liberal arts background and the work that I do in tech. Meet Sarah and Alex, and I think we have one of Alex's team members here today. Sarah is from London. She's a Java developer, and she exists in a world where there's no testing team. Developers write all the tests. She has a history degree, though, focused on women's history, and a few masters, one in women's studies and another in modern British history, focusing on masculinity in computer science. Fascinating to me. She never did any coding prior to the boot camp she attended. And when she started, she noticed that there were a cross-section of skills that are underestimated in the field in general, yet she found herself relying on. For example, breaking down a problem into smaller parts, walking through a problem in a logical way, something you have to do to write a good paper. She found herself stepping back and asking why. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose? What is the big picture? Developing the empathy. Why something might be the right technical decision, but what is the end user going to feel? And Alex from Germany She's head of software quality and test consulting at Bredex and a product owner for the open source test tool Jubila. She majored in languages and linguistics, and her branch was phonetics and phonology. And from that, when we talked, she learned how to model things, dealing with abstract representation that doesn't cover everything, switching back and forth between the larger goal. And as a product owner, she also has to choose how to communicate in any given time. Alex found that learning language has taught not only that you can't know everything, even if you are fluent, and that learning language helped with pattern matching, finding connections, and asking what if something is connected to something else. So whether you have a liberal arts background or not, let's talk about a few things we can do today to make us and our teams better testers and technologists. Some of these may seem obvious, but throughout my career, I'm amazed at how often the simple things can be discarded. There's a little book in America, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Robert Fulgham discusses how we can improve as adults if we just think about some basic rules we learned as children. So I was thinking about my lessons and what helped me grow that anyone can do. First and foremost, read. Read 1,000 times read. Don't just read a book on coding. Read a book on philosophy. Read fiction. Read Harry Potter. Read Shakespeare. Read poetry. Read autobiographies. The point is to get different perspectives. Fareed Zakaria states that reading remains one of the most important paths to real knowledge. Does anybody here have children? A lot of us. If we cannot stress enough the importance of reading with them every day, why do we stop stressing that importance into adulthood? So my daughter is in 2nd grade, and before they start any new topic or begin a story, they have to ask questions on what they are curious about. Before you set out to build anything, ask the 5 questions we learned in elementary school: who, what, where, when, and why. These questions are a part of critical thinking that I found essential in almost everything I work on. Start with who. Who are we building this feature for? Who else are we building this feature for? In my case, I often have to look at many roles involved in a feature. For example, a test in a course in our Blackboard system. I have to consider the instructor, the student, the advisor, the parent, anybody who can create the thing, submit it, grade it, who needs to see that grade. And if you're automating tests, understand their skill set so you can set yourself up for success too, or know where you need to supplement that team. If you're considering a test suite, who maintains and monitors them? Who is expected to take action on them if they fail? If you don't consider these things, I've seen teams not answer those questions before just building everything, and then those suites die a miserable death because nobody's there to take care of them. And you can ask what? What do you need to understand what you're providing of value to a customer, whether a feature to a client or a new process to a team? If you're designing a suite, what is the business question the test answers? This can help you establish if you need that check or test or not, or if you need to design a new suite entirely because you don't have a business question yet for that, but you do, but you might need it. You can also help develop the empathy. Consider what this makes a user feel. Are they delighted, frustrated? Have you done UX testing before? This was a pretty eye-opening experience for me when we actually did user experience testing with our clients at our user conference. And you can see their frustration on their face. But it's even more enabling when you get to see their delight. And I really recommend that experience if you haven't been able to do that yet. And consider what the impact will be if you do this. We also need to ask where. I've definitely had features we worked on that were in areas of code that just seemed to have, like I said earlier, tentacles everywhere. And we found ourselves asking, where else could this change impact many times over? Where else do I need to test that I might not have thought of before? In our case, where my end user test located can be critical. We found out that not everyone is using a high-powered computer or has high-speed internet. We have very rural areas of our country that might not support rendering a page quickly. We have to consider that. And people also have different methods of learning. We need to understand the culture that may be consuming what we build. And of course, we need to ask when. Ask things that will help you understand the performance needs. Or in my world, we've been mostly focused on asking when for the test suites we design. If it'll be in a pipeline, when are they triggered? Are they gated? And just as my 4-year-old likes to ask all the time, why? Why do we need a feature? I don't believe we can test everything, and we really need to justify if we really need to check something. And for each of these, always add the word else. Who else? What else? When else? Why else? This will help you dig deep. Then we can answer how. Once you've gone through this method of interrogation, then start discovering how you can build something. I feel totally inadequate to talk about this given Patty's recent talk. However, Laura Hogan, she's the vice president of engineering at Kickstarter, and she used to be at Etsy, practices mindful communication. We can all do this, and I really love what she had to say. In all we do, are we keeping it real? Whether in meetings or chats or code reviews. Reflect on the dynamics in the room. Be mindful of your audience. Be aware of your tone or voice, choice of wording, or body language. Seek out ways to be inclusive so that it acknowledges everyone in the audience, not just the majority. Next, elevate the conversation. Put it beyond yourself. Be constructive and productive. Imagine you are face-to-face with that person. Would you still say this to them? One of my favorites is assume best intentions. We're all playing for the same team. Who shows up to say, I really hope I do a bad job today? Practice empathy. We may all go through some tough days. While we don't need to ask what's up, we should be considering this. Be mindful that somebody may have something else going on, and how we communicate with them could affect how they receive our information that we have to offer. And lastly, listen to learn. Stay genuinely curious. Operate under the assumption that you don't know the whole story. And most importantly, be willing to have your mind changed. Be open. So as employees, we have these basic skills we can do, but what can we do as employers? There's a few things that I think we can do to ensure we are rounding out our teams. Don't discount people with a CS degree. This is a huge pet peeve of mine when I see job requirements. Did you know that women are more likely to apply only if they check all of the boxes on a resume, even if it's only listed in preferred skills? This will help us build diverse teams, not just gender or ethnic diversity, but also focusing on diversity in thought. When you're interviewing, are you looking beyond the technical to see what other perspectives candidates bring to the table? We need to widen the nets in our applicant pools. Next, we want to create pathways with schools and boot camps. That's a pic of me and my girls in North Carolina on our path through the waterfall there. As far as boot camps are concerned, people that attend these are interested in coding. They have an interest in tech. I met with some phenomenal women, non-binary people at Write Speak Code, many who just finished their boot camps. And they felt that they learned a lot, they were intense, but that there is a stigma with these boot camps. How can we partner with them as employees with the reputable boot camps, especially those that cater to women and non-binary people, and create pathways to jobs? And are we partnering with liberal arts colleges to look at internships for those perhaps not in a CS program? Do they know that that is even an option for them? So maybe I won't be taking a few months to go off to a code boot camp, though I would love to one day. But I know many times in my career, learning was really only okay on our own time, which leads me to my next point. Provide time for learning as an employer. Are you allocating time for your team to learn? And I mean really learn. Llewellyn Falco has talked about considering learn time as compound interest. So if you assume, say, a 1% increase in knowledge, you actually end up being more productive over time, even though it may look like less work getting done on those timesheets over the first couple of months. And it doesn't have to be just learning to code. Encourage your team to learn things that will help give them those different perspectives. I'll be honest, my learning is done during work hours. At the end of the day, and 2 small kids to take care of, I just want to sleep. My mind is not the same in the evening as it is first thing in the morning. I know I do my best learning from around 7 to 12. We need to understand that learning is not just about acquiring knowledge, though, but applying it and providing your teams a place to experiment, allow them to fail, and to learn and grow from it. You will help build and retain their knowledge. So why do I think the liberal arts are so important for the future of automation? The ancient Greek philosopher Plato emphasized that knowledge is more than just information or data. It comes from knowing how to ask and answer questions. In The Fuzzy and the Techie, Hartley discusses that our data is only as good as the people interpreting it. As testers, I think we're especially equipped to do this with our natural curiosity and inquisitive minds. Are we looking at the data we are capturing and asking questions on new features based around this? Are we asking what browsers, devices, workflows they are using more? Are we recognizing patterns from this that can help us model our testing and automation? In my particular industry, analytics and education is huge, but we're going to need the experts, the professors, the educators, the administrators, to work hand in hand with the technologists to make use of the big data to change the way we learn and set the learning journey. The emphasis of most techies is on how to gather, store, search, and process big data, which Shyam Sankar points out are necessary but insufficient to getting the most value from the data. The imperative is not to figure out how to compute, but what to compute. The bots are coming. And just as big data relies on the questioners, artificial intelligence and machine learning relies on the inputs that we as humans are best equipped for. I mentioned that I have found adaptability as a key skill in my testing career, and this is especially needed for me as we are in the age of AI and ML. This is an area I still have a lot of learning to do in, but I'm excited about it. My friend Greg wrote that he sees a world where we don't even necessarily need humans to automate tests one day, but we still need them around to ask the questions and define the inputs that are required for that AI. Or what if our code now knows what to test based on a particular change? We have to think through the inputs for those decisions to be made. Maybe you want to consider testing more if it's a fragile area of the application, or maybe less if you know it to be incredibly isolated. Again, it comes down to the inputs and questions we ask to help define those possibilities. And as I was talking with our analytics team, something really stood out to me is that artificial intelligence cannot do things people cannot do. It just does them faster. We need to know humans to know what we are capable of designing. And the liberal arts gives us this. So we also need to consider the ethics in all we do. As testers, as members of your teams, are you helping to ask this question? Thinking about the way we communicate and how much it has changed since I was in school, what do you think the unintended consequence of email was? Or Slack or Twitter or HipChat or texting? For me, I found it to be stress. I don't think one person thought up these things and said, how do I stress out the entire world? But it stresses me out. That fear of not responding in time or missing out on an update, I think that it has an unintended consequence for us. We should always be asking, what will our users feel based on this? And those are things automation can't really tell us sometimes. And in education, our interpretation of big data, the use of AI, and making predictions for students, this has an effect on people's lives. We must explore the consequences of that. For example, if we were to build a feature that helps suggest a learning path a student may want to take based on current interests in other course loads, I think it's fascinating and amazing, but I also question, what is the future impact? Could providing suggested coursework have an effect on the student? Do they get set on a path, not considering the forked roads of life that I seem to take in my education? And of course, the big elephant in the testing room is job displacement. As we further develop AI, do we consider what this means? And I think this is where adaptability really comes into play for all of us. So, I love Jurassic Park, sorry. So I close with my opening slide. I can't talk liberal arts without throwing in a little bit of art history for you. And one of my favorite paintings that I ever learned about is the School of Athens by Raphael. This painting represents the great mathematicians, the philosophers, the scientists across time gathered together, sharing and learning from each other. And it's probably Raphael's most famous fresco, and it's believed to include Pythagoras, Socrates, Ptolemy, Plato, and Aristotle. And the point is, we are in the midst of a renaissance of our own. We need the thinkers, the philosophers, the scientists, the mathematicians, the technologists, the engineers, the people who can dream, and the people who can build, to all work together and be valued. Thank you.
All right, if we have any questions for Ashley, I think now would be a good time. We have microphones running around the audience. Any questions? Straight in the back.
Do you mind passing that back?
By the way, Ashley, as a linguistics major, it's awesome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Did you ever feel in your career that the last kind of roles in our society that you mentioned, that we need philosophers, mathematicians, or all the other pioneers who shaped the human evolution, that somehow you felt that we don't need it, and that's why this talk is kind of matured, or?
No, I feel the exact opposite. I feel we absolutely need them. My concern when I was discussing how we were trying to defund liberal arts programs, at least in the United States and elsewhere in the world, what happens if we actually do defund these programs and we aren't focusing on the human side of software engineering? We need to know people to build and be software engineers.
Okay.
Down here, third of the way up. Raise your hand higher, please.
I can try to
right
hear
over
you.
here. Ruth is coming. Here.
So Ashley, thank you very much for this talk. I really appreciate that you have all these soft skills presented, which are really important in our daily work. But why do you have to random around at university and just learn something which you really don't need? And then by random, you have some soft skill points which you don't need. Why don't you just focus on the important things like soft skills for testing manager or something like this? And we create those studies, and then we throw away all the other things which we don't need, like, I don't know, history or arts or whatever, and we just extract the important things from that and put them into courses.
Actually,
so you don't have to bother with all the other things in the background.
Actually, breathe for a second.
I actually think soft skills are the hardest to learn.
Thank you, yes.
I really do. And I don't think it's something that you can learn in a week course. These are things that I took 4 years to develop and over the course of my career to develop, not just a 1-week lesson.
Hi.
Hi.
I have one question. You mentioned that you don't like to concentrate on gender stereotypes, instead of that on personality types. Why is that?
Well, mostly because I don't like to be pegged into any sort of gender stereotype. I tried not to focus on gender stereotypes for my own children. I want them to be raised thinking they can do anything, regardless of what culture or history has said. Girls should do this, boys should do this. It's just a personal opinion of mine. Of course, they exist. And I try to lessen that noise for my children and myself moving forward. That's
Yep.
all.
Yeah, but like my question would be like, if you think that ignoring the fact of existence of these stereotypes can help them not to influence the teamwork.
Yeah, like I said, it happens. But
What if it happens?
well, we do. I've certainly experienced it in my career. I just honestly try to brush it off and think, well, I'm still here not just because I'm a woman, but it just depends. But I would really love to carry that conversation on. I think it's more than what I can answer here on a stage, so I'm
Okay.
sorry.
And by the way, I'm a psychologist.
Oh,
so,
yay.
Ha.
Can I get a show of hands of people who do have liberal arts backgrounds? Look about 25, 30%? Cool.
Yay, us.
Are there any more questions for Ashley? Cool, great. Thank you very much,
you.
Ashley. That was wonderful. How about a hand? Give Ashley a hand.